I don't, for what it's worth.
It's an amino acid.
Interestingly,
Right. Many of these things have.
So it was very beneficial for...
My name is Matt Caberlin, and welcome to the Optispan podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to the Optispan podcast. On today's episode, Nick and I are going to kind of do a pretty high-level conversation around sauna and cold plunge. In part, this is inspired by, the proliferation, I think, of information out there and some influencers who really emphasize these as important tools for longevity or a sort of overall quality of life. And also the opportunity to go visit our friend Mike Mutzel, who is local and actually has a really nice sauna to just try it out. So I personally have never done cold plunge per se. So I had one experience with a polar bear plunge on New Year's Day in Lake Sammamish, which is a local lake, but I've never actually done cold plunge sauna before. And so my sort of views on this topic really come from having never tried it. And of course, it's better to have actually experienced it. So we went out and actually did the whole thing with Mike and then sat down for an interview with him. So Nick, what's your experience with sauna and cold plunge going into this?
Yeah, a lot more with sauna. I used to do it probably 2 to 3 times a week for almost 8 years when I worked at Pro Club. Just kind of on my lunch break, I would just go and do the sauna, 15 minutes around 180 degrees. Never have done that was my second cold plunge. So my first one was with Mike Mutzel, so the same one that you did, around 35 degrees. That was back in January, so the day before I started here at Optispan. And then my second one was with you guys a couple days ago.
Okay. Interesting. Cool. And so why did you do sauna previously? Like, what was it that made you decide that was something you wanted to do regularly?
Yeah, I never did it for like thinking this would make me live longer. It was more so for the mental, the de-stress. It's the one place, the 30 minutes a week where I don't have my cell phone, where I don't have any anything electronic. I'm just kind of there. I actually had a lot of great conversations with members. So I would just kind of learn more about their sort of view of the club and just feedback I could help. So it was just a good sort of community / mental health.
And you had sort of easy access to a convenient sauna as well at that time. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I missed that. We need to get one here.
Yeah. Okay. And I think, so this question around, are these really, do they even belong under the sort of longevity umbrella? I think it's still an open question. I think, the evidence in support of sauna or sauna cold plunge for longevity, largely comes from correlative studies of European populations, primarily Scandinavian, where there's some association between health outcomes and use of sauna. But I think the data is pretty weak from a compelling perspective. Mm-hmm. Now, you can point to some potential mechanisms that could tie into longevity. I think most people, if you're thinking about like a molecular mechanism, would say, there's some evidence in invertebrate animals, C. elegans in particular, that if you upregulate heat shock proteins, these are proteins that get induced by heat, that can have pro-longevity benefits. There's a transcription factor called heat shock factor 1 that if you overexpress, increases lifespan in C. elegans. That would be expected to improve what's called protein homeostasis, so ability to restore appropriate structure to misfolded protein. So you can get pretty speculative, and it's pretty speculative, but there is evidence that repeated heat shock or increased expression of these heat shock proteins is associated with longevity, at least in worms. Now, again, outside of that, I think the evidence that repeated heat shock is a longevity intervention is lacking. So I don't personally think there's a bunch of evidence to support the idea that repeated sauna or sauna cold plunge is going to have a similar sort of mechanistic impact in people, but it is possible. I think the other things people will point to are studies suggesting that, sauna in particular can improve vasodilation, so blood flow, increase heart rate. And I know this is something you mentioned, so we should touch on that. So your heart rate will go up in the sauna, reduced blood pressure, probably, anti-anxiety or reduced stress. Detoxification is another thing we kind of talked about with Mike, the idea that you're sweating out toxins and potential anti-inflammatory effects, all of which could be beneficial. So you had mentioned, I think, in our conversation in the sauna that the increased heart rate was one of the things that you thought about as a potential benefit from sauna and how that compares to cardio exercise and things like that.
Yeah, like if you have time to do both, that'd be great. But if you have someone who for the life of you, they won't do cardio, it might be the next best thing. Of like, let's still get your heart rate up, let's still get you sweating, kind of that blood flow in the sauna. If you're not getting the mechanical stress of working out, but it's better than nothing. It's kind of one way I thought about it.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's interesting. And I don't know enough about the literature here to really be able to comment on what the current thinking is as to how beneficial it is to increase your heart rate through repeated sauna versus exercise. I mean, again, as you mentioned, I think there are many things that exercise is going to do for you that sauna won't. There are probably some things sauna will do for you that exercise won't. Relative benefits, I think you have to give, obviously, the nod to exercise. But as you said, if you can't do exercise or you only have time to do one, maybe on a rest day, sauna would still be a way to get your heart rate up. And again, the other effects of vasodilation, potentially reduced stress resistance, all compelling reasons why sauna could be beneficial. Now, as we've talked about before, anytime you think about an intervention and benefits, you want to do the corresponding risk analysis. So what's the risk reward? I think most people would think the risk is pretty low from sauna, and I agree, it is, but it's not zero. And I actually know a guy who passed out in his sauna, and he passed out, I think it was like this, with his arm sort of pinned behind him, actually got his arm amputated.
Wow.
So it does happen.
Wow.
And I know somebody who this happened to. So there are risks, even if they are low. People die in the sauna. And passing out due to low blood pressure, burns from the sauna, dehydration, risk of arrhythmia, heart attack, other cardiovascular issues. I think those are all unlikely, but real. And again, I don't know exactly what the data is, but just in a quick Google search suggests probably around 20 deaths per year due to sauna use in Finland, where this is like really popular. Many of those are also associated with alcohol use. So again, you kind of have to understand context. Definitely a good idea not to sauna and alcohol at the same time, but it is part of any rational approach to a health intervention to really try to think through what are the risks, what are the rewards, where does that fall, and then if there are risks, what can I do to minimize my risks? And so I think one obvious thing, I already mentioned alcohol, another obvious thing is just don't do it alone. Right. So the guy I know, he was doing it alone, and fortunately his wife found him or he wouldn't be here today.
Wow.
So it does happen. Accidents do happen in saunas, and it's worth understanding that.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. And that's something Mike Mutzel said is he does a lot of, client meetings, friends and family, neighbors. So it's a community thing for him.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's an added value, right? If you use sauna as part of a community relationship tool, right? It also hits that connect pillar, which as we've sort of discussed in other episodes, is one that is weak for a lot of people. So that's a indirect potential benefit depending on how you use it.
And you guys discussed that in your interview, which will be on his channel. So
that's right.
High Intensity Health probably by the time this is posted, it should be out.
Yeah. So what about cold plunge? Again, I can't really think of any direct evidence, even in a very speculative way, that would suggest that cold plunge is a longevity intervention in the sense of, have there been studies where this has been looked at in the context of lifespan? Probably about the best you could do would be to say there are studies that lower core body temperature in animals is associated with longer lifespan, but that's really speculative. So I don't think there's much to suggest that cold plunge in and of itself is a longevity mechanism. For sort of broader health benefits, a lot of people will point to reduced muscle soreness, improved recovery from exercise. Certainly, ice baths have been used by athletes for decades, right, for this reason. So I'm sure there's reality there. The cold will actually be vasoconstrictive. So the combination of sauna, cold plunge, sauna could have sort of interesting effects on the circulatory system by increasing blood flow. And then, of course, many people will talk about improved mood, feeling less stress. being more alert after doing the cold plunge or the cycle of sauna, cold plunge, sauna. And again, I think those things are all probably real, probably very individual. You and I both know an individual who swears that a lot of his chronic pain has been improved by regular sauna, cold plunge use. And so for him, at least, it's a real thing. It definitely has that effect.
Yeah, the mental aspect of it, like the Joe Rogans of the world, it's just starting your day doing something you don't want to do.
Yeah.
And then having that momentum carried forward is kind of like a common thing I'll hear cold plunge people talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a little bit harder to quantify, but the idea that you feel a sense of accomplishment, right, to some extent from doing something that is maybe not natural, maybe not fun. Again, I don't know. Some people like, I think, the cold plunge aspect of it, but and I think for some people, there's maybe even a confidence boost that goes along with it. The idea that even if it's this thing that is not life-threatening, right, it is a little bit of it's a hard thing for some people. And it's like, yep, I can do that. I can do it. And I can accomplish this.
Yeah.
So the other thing is this idea of sauna, cold plunge sauna, right, which is, I guess, called contrast therapy, could be different from sauna alone or cold plunge alone. In fact, would be different from. And again, I don't know how strong the data is one way or the other on the contrast therapy as opposed to sauna alone versus cold plunge alone.
But you mentioned that you think doing sauna first helped you go longer in the cold plunge.
Well, I mean, I think almost certainly that's true. For me personally, I think that's true, but haven't done the corresponding experiment, except for that polar bear plunge where I did not have a sauna first and I was cold. Okay, so we talked about potential benefits. What are the risks of cold plunge? Again, I think it's pretty obvious. Hypothermia, you stay in there too long, you're going to die, just like in a sauna. So same rules apply. Probably shouldn't be having a lot of alcohol before doing a cold plunge. Probably shouldn't do it alone. I think in people who are prone to cardiovascular stress, that could be a precipitating factor for heart attack or other cardiovascular problems. Breathing difficulty, I think, is pretty common. You experienced this.
Yeah.
So in some people, this causes a bronchoconstriction, right, where their lungs sort of... Right. Yeah. And that seemed to be something that you experienced.
Yeah, we'll show the footage. We'll show the video. So it happened both times. Right.
Yeah.
The second time was a lot better. First time, the entire minute, I could find that video, but I couldn't control my breath.
Yeah, which is really interesting. So, and I wonder, that made me wonder, is this at all related to this phenomenon of cold-induced asthma, right? And I think it probably isn't, because I didn't feel that at all in the cold plunge. But this is something I've always had this issue, but I didn't recognize it until probably 5 years ago, what it actually was. If the air is cold and I'm exercising to a point where I'm breathing more rapidly, I get asthma symptoms. And I've always had like chest pain or I'm coughing for the rest of the day after exercising in cold air. And it's this thing called cold-induced asthma. And so the solution is you just wear something over your mouth, a gaiter or something like that, neck gaiter. No, you just wear something over your mouth, cloth, so that the air coming in isn't as cold.
I see.
Completely took care of it for me. So there's a tip. Any of you who, when you exercise outside on a moderately or very cold day, experience asthma symptoms or coughing or tickling in your throat or lungs, try just getting a neck gaiter, putting it up over your mouth and nose, completely takes care of it for me. So that's been a game changer for me, actually.
Good to know. I'm not sure if this is related, but I had pretty severe asthma as a child, like inhaler and doctor visits, the whole thing. So I grew out of it. I was kind of like a good track athlete in junior high school. But I don't know if there's maybe something related there or not.
Yeah,
but
could be. Yeah. In any case, I never had asthma, which is why I never picked up on what this was until, I don't know, I was doing, I think it was actually during COVID when our local gym closed and they started having outdoor exercise classes, right? And so we would go to the local park, it'd be like 6 a.m., steam coming out of your mouth. And I was having this problem breathing. And the instructor was like, did you ever think that maybe this is what's going on? Fixed it. So anyways, something to pay attention to. If you get in the cold plunge and have trouble breathing, that's probably what's going on. It's not uncommon. Apparently there's something called trench foot, which maybe that's what Mike was alluding to when I was in there for 3+ minutes. And he's like, how do your feet feel?
Yeah.
Apparently this is another common thing, pain, swelling but it can lead to tissue damage. So again, when you think about risks, you want to just be aware of what could go wrong, even if it's pretty rare.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So I wanted to sort of talk about just what the day looked like, our morning hanging out with Mike Mutzel and your first time doing a cold plunge. So we got in around 8 a.m. He fired up his classic Finnish sauna. So you're actually burning the wood, which is pretty interesting.
Very cool. Yeah.
Yep. The cold plunge was set to 35 degrees. So we kind of chat. We went in. We had a great conversation. It was about I think we did 20 minutes around 200 to 220 degrees. A higher humidity than most saunas because he was actually kind of pouring water.
Yeah.
Could you feel when he poured the water how it kind of the humidity hit?
Yeah. One thing I thought was interesting is how quickly both of you just the sweat was coming off, and I hadn't even really started sweating. Yeah. Certainly by the time we got to 20 minutes, I was, but it was just interesting the difference. And I don't remember whether it was you or Mike, but one of you said that, there may even be an adaptation. If you sauna a lot, your body adapts and you go into that mode of active sweating faster. I don't know if that's true, but
he was
it's
sweating
plausible.
way more than me. So we're kind of sweating in order of who does the most sauna.
Right.
So there's something there. What I talked about, he uses it for social events and everything. Great conversation. Maybe gave me the idea of if only we could film podcasts out of saunas.
Yeah.
That'd be kind of fun.
Maybe we'll get there. I don't know. What do you guys think? Give us feedback.
See. So then the cold plunge, it was a Morozko Forge, who the CEO is Thomas Seeger, and he's actually coming on our podcast in mid-September. So we'll get to talk to him more about cold plunge in general.
Cool.
As we'll see in the footage, I think you went first, and you lasted 3.5 minutes.
Yeah. So I got to say, going in, I was a little intimidated by the cold plunge, and I didn't expect to last very long. And again, my only experience was this polar bear plunge. I mean, I did it, but I was cold, and I got out pretty quick. And I would say, certainly for the last 3 years, maybe not quite that long, couple of years, I feel like I've been much more cold sensitive. I get cold a lot easier, probably at least in part because my body fat is lower now than it used to be. So I expected to be very sensitive, to get in there and want to get right back out. So I was really surprised when I got in. And first of all, it felt really good. Yeah. And I didn't really get cold. I mean, even at the 3.5 minutes, I was getting cold, but I certainly could have stayed in there longer and it wouldn't have been super uncomfortable or anything. So yeah, it was very surprising to me that I lasted as long as I did and didn't really feel that sort of bone chilling, cold. Oh my God, I got to get out of here. And I wasn't shivering when I got out, right? Even afterwards. So
it was interesting because Mike also was around the same time. He could have gone longer, but he stopped. But I lasted maybe 90 seconds. I forget the exact, just a bit over a minute, under 2 minutes. And I was shivering when I got out. And I felt like part of me wanted to have this sort of David Goggins, let's just do it. But I felt like I couldn't. The breathing, I don't know how you measure cold tolerance, and I do cold showers almost every day. You don't. So you'd think on paper I have more cold tolerance practice than you. Right. But you stopped me, so I'm not sure what it is.
Again, I mean, I think, first of all, I should do the experiment again, right? We have to do it at least 3 times to know whether that's a pattern. Maybe it was just that day. But, I mean, I think, obviously, it's going to depend on a lot of stuff. It would be nice if we knew what our core body temperature was going into the sauna, coming out of the sauna. Wouldn't be surprising if that had some effect on the perceived cold tolerance in the cold plunge. And it was cold. I remember when I looked in there and saw the sheet of ice on the bottom, and I was like, oh my God.
Yeah. When I first did it, in the first video I'll show is there's ice on top. So you had to push ice out of the way, but I'm not sure. But you hear people talk about it being mental, it's all mental. But I'm curious.
No, it's not all mental.
Yeah, so
it's not at all mental. There is definitely a true physical component and there are going to be individual differences in cold tolerance. Again, one obvious explanation is how much body fat you have, but there's going to be a bunch of stuff that goes into it. So yeah, again, I mean, this idea that, it's about just your mental fortitude and being able to push through. I mean, I think to some extent there's value in pushing yourself, but it's like anything else. You don't want to be dumb in the way you do it and push yourself into hypothermia.
Yeah. Well, some people I know who own cold plunges, they start at 50, and then each day they go 49, 48. You went straight to 35.
I know, right?
I mean, when does water freezes at 32, right? So you're pretty close to as cold
Yeah,
as
it was cold.
Go.
I mean, it was cold water. Yeah, again, I was surprised. I did not expect it to be as easy from at least a perceived experience as it was for me to get in and stay in the cold plunge as long as I did.
Yeah. And so the best part was after we all did our cold plunge, we went back in the sauna, did 20 more minutes, which is probably easier than the first 20 minutes just because we were kind of already cool. And it's interesting going from cold to sweating again. That's sort of transition. But again, good conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we did a couple of interesting observations. One is I felt really good when I got out of the cold plunge, like definitely a psychological lift. And I don't, to the extent to which that persisted the rest of the day, I don't know. I think probably for the next couple of hours, I felt perceived being a little bit more alert. I guess we'll see. People can watch the podcast that we did with Mike and you can judge whether I was more mentally alert or less, but I sort of felt that way. And then I think you and I both experienced later in the day around 2:00 or whatever, it was nap time. We didn't take naps, but we could have.
Yeah. And I noticed that even back in my gym sauna days is I would get sleepy. I don't know if it's from the maybe I need to get more electrolytes in me post sauna. I don't think that was the ice plunge. I think that was more of the sauna that gets me sleepy, speaking personally. But I know Huberman talks a lot about body temperature, circadian rhythms. I don't know if there's something there.
Again, it could be. It's biologically plausible, probably not much data to back it up at this point. The other thing that we tried was grip strength, right? So you brought one of these, grip strength testers. And I think the hypothesis was that grip strength would get better after sauna, cold plunge, sauna. We tested it, and for you and Mike, it actually got worse or went down. So before versus after, right? Whereas for me, it actually went up. So we did not have a clear pattern, I guess, as to what the effect of that contrast therapy is on at least acute grip strength, meaning day of, right, change. Yeah. But for you two, it went down, and for me, it went up.
Yeah, there's a lot of good data, too, on grip strength and longevity, and I think that'd be a fun future episode. And in the meantime, I thought it'd be fun if our guests, at least the guests who they say they enjoy resistance training, it would be fun to test their grip strength and sort of have a leaderboard. So right now, Mike's the only person on it, but I think he'll be number one for a while. He was around 130 pounds on his dominant hand, so yeah, it's pretty impressive. So
yeah, and I think we have video of that, so I don't know if it makes it in, that would be good.
Let's do it. Here we go. 131.8.
Wow.
What's funny about grip?
Good job.
Cool.
All right, that was a
Anything
fun day.
else?
No, let's do more work days like that.
More field trips for sauna, cold plunge sauna. No, I think, I mean, after my experience, I would say again, still pretty skeptical that in and of themselves, that sort of contrast therapy or either alone is a potent longevity mechanism. I think it certainly can, for some people, be a stress resistance or perceived improvement in pain, quality of life, and probably real for some people. Like I say perceived, but I think there are probably real biological mechanisms around chronic inflammation, muscle soreness. Is it going to work for everybody like anything else? No, probably not. Is it going to move the needle in a big way for most people? My intuition is no, probably not. Certainly not in place of the other things that we know, other levers we can pull that have a big impact on health span, nutrition, exercise, sleep quality, relationships, right? I certainly wouldn't want to suggest that you don't have to pay attention to that if you have a sauna and a cold plunge, right? But I think for some people, it can be a useful tool. I certainly am open to doing it again. If it was easy, if I had easy access to one, I'd probably do it, at least regularly for a while and see if the sort of initial experience repeats and continues to feel like it has value.
They sell them at Costco. Would you ever just get one in your backyard?
Have to talk to my wife about that. We'll see.
Here, actually. Okay, so maybe for lifespan, it's hard to say, but for health span, pretty strong that it could be a good sort of quality of life, mental health.
I think for some people, for sure. Yeah. Again, I think it's just important to recognize it's probably not going to be for everybody. And I would not prioritize sauna and cold plunge at the expense of other things that we know are going to have probably a bigger effect on moving the needle. That's probably where I'd land.
That's fair. All right. Well, I hope people find it fun, and then we'll talk about it again in September with Thomas Seeger. So
yeah, and at some point we'll have Mike over here for an interview on the Optispan podcast, which will be fun too.
Yes. Stay tuned for that.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everyone. Hope you enjoyed this episode. As always, if you've got any comments or questions, please leave them below. If you're not yet a subscriber, click that subscribe button, and we will see you next time on the podcast.